Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, just your reaction on these allegations that extreme racism is still taking place in the Calgary Fire Department.
Well, you know, when we had our anti-racism hearings, a lot of very brave employees across the organization came forward to tell their stories of racism and of challenges within the organization. And the organization, I'm actually quite proud of our city manager because it was very quick that the organization pivoted and took on a role of saying that we need to move towards not just being an inclusive organization, but being an actively anti-racist organization. And that means really changing the corporate culture in those pockets where we're seeing activity like this. At the end of those hearings, I requested that we actually do a significant investigation in all of the business units where we had people come forward and tell us about their problems. I have not yet seen the results of that work, but I know that that work is underway. However, we heard on that day and in the open letter that we've seen some very troubling allegations within one particular business unit, the Calgary Fire Department, but we have heard in other ones as well about some of these challenges. That is unacceptable. It's unacceptable in today's society, and it's unacceptable in this organization. And this organization needs to lead the community in being an anti-racist organization. So as I'm hearing that some of this is still going on despite investigations going on, of course, that's something that I will take very seriously and ensure that we've got the right plans in place to root that out because it's not acceptable.
And there are allegations that the city and specifically the fire chief has known that this has been going on for quite a few years. What's the solution here? What's the problem there? What do you say to the fact that the city knew that this was going on?
Well, these are really the things that tend to get unearthed when we do a human resources investigation. And really there's always the question of what did you know, when did you know, and what did you do about it? Now I will point out that when this fire chief was hired, it was on a strong mandate to build inclusivity in the fire department, particularly on the issue of gender. Maybe we didn't talk as much about the issue of race at that time, but that has been a mandate of the fire chiefs. So I too am curious, you know, what did we know, when did we know it, and what did we do about it at that time? And those are the answers that I'm looking for as well.
And there were 2 workplace reviews that were done in the last 6 years. They haven't been made public. Should they be made public? Should we know what was found out about the workplace culture there?
Well, let me start by saying I should know what those workplace reviews have said. And at this point, I don't. So I'll reserve judgment on how public they should be until I've got a better understanding of what is in there. But ultimately, I am most interested in making sure that we change the culture and that the culture is, as I say, actively anti-racist.
Is it a problem that you don't know what's in those?
Not really, because normally it's not that appropriate for me to get deeply engaged in human resources issues. But our conversation about moving towards anti-racism really has changed the rules a little bit. And we're still adapting to what that looks like.
And what do you have to say to BIPOC firefighters who are still going to work every day and experiencing these sort of types of, whether it's overt or sort of microaggression type racism?
Yeah, well, both of those things are unacceptable. Obviously, overt racism, you shouldn't have to put up with it. Absolutely not. And there are processes in place. Remember, you do work in a large organization, not just in the fire department. You work for the city of Calgary, and we will protect you and we will help you through those things. On the issue of microaggression, look, we all have a lot to learn. And as I've been saying for many months now, people of color, and particularly Black and Indigenous people in our community, sort of have lived by an unwritten deal for many, many years. And the deal basically is we put up with stuff because in return we get to live here. And we get to live in a place where our kids have boundless opportunity. And I think what we learned this summer is that for too many of our neighbors, that's not a good deal. And they shouldn't have to put up with stuff, and they shouldn't have to carry the weight of this all the time. And that's, for me, the difference between this pluralistic society that I'm proud of, that we've created, and an actively anti-racist society. And that's a journey. I don't know where it's going. There's a lot of risk in this as we look at fundamentally questioning some of the ways that we live and work together. But I think it's a risk worth taking.
Subject to the redactions that would be required to be made, do you see any reason why the balance of those reports could not be released publicly?
On the surface, no, but I don't really want to say anything until I know what's in those reports. Because for all I know, they are, 100% redundant. Because they might be about very specific situations. I just don't know.
Does the fire chief have your confidence to stay in his position?
Well, yeah, until I know otherwise, because I know the chief very well, and I know that the issues of inclusion have been incredibly important to him, and frankly, it's one of the reasons we hired him.
What possible actions could council take to deal with or to look further into this issue?
That's a good question, and again, I apologize that I don't know more about this. Typically, human resources issues deep in the organization are not things council concerns themselves with, because we have a bunch of human resources policies through the organization that need to be followed. But ultimately, I'm sure that my colleagues will have a lot of questions about this one.
Can I ask you your opinion? I mean, if people are feeling harassed at the workplace to the point of taking their own lives,
it's horrifying. It's horrifying, and it's completely wrong.
What recommendations would you have to council to say, here's a group of options we should think about to deal with a very serious situation?
Yeah, ultimately, my simplest option is that's got to stop. But we also have folks who understand inclusivity and understand human resources probably better than I do. And I really would be looking to them to say, all right, how do you change a corporate culture then?
Is there a message that you would send to the rank and file in the Calgary Fire Department, as Megan learned in her story? Apparently things like the use of the N-word is almost a daily occurrence in Calgary fire halls. Is there a message you would have for the people that are doing this?
I will tell you that when I heard Megan say that on the radio this morning, I may have nearly caused myself bodily injury because that was unspeakable. I spend my life dealing with lots of racists, but also really in community, and I haven't heard anyone use that word in years. And the fact that use it in regular conversation in years. And the fact that we're hearing that, it's absolutely unacceptable. So I want to say two things to my colleagues in the Calgary Fire Department. Number one is, I know you want to make the fire department work for everyone, and we got to work hard to make it work for everyone. It's my BIPOC colleagues in the fire department. I want to say you should have, and you have every right to have, an extraordinary career. You dreamed of being a firefighter, and let's make sure that the career lives up to your dreams. And to those who perhaps ascribe to an old school locker room mentality in the fire department, I mean, what can I say other than quit it and understand that you serve every single person in this community, and you must be reflective of every single person in this community, and you must earn the trust of every single person in this community.
Does this hurt the city? Does this hurt Calgary Fire Department?
It hurts me. It hurts me to hear that my colleagues are being subjected to this, and I'm going to do everything I can within my power and authority in my own hands to make sure that every single person who joins the city of Calgary, whether in the fire department or in any other role, has the opportunity to have an outstanding career, and that we value and respect what they look like and where they come from, and all of those differences, how they worship, whom they love, that make this community work.
Had you heard, you've been mayor for 10 years plus, have you heard of the extent of the problem that Megan uncovered in her story?
No, I've heard a lot about gender issues, and that is certainly something that we've been looking at for many years. But really it was at the hearings in July where I started to hear, it's very clear to me, I go to all the firefighter graduations, so it's clear to me that it is not a particularly diverse workforce compared to, say, Calgary Transit or even the Calgary Police. And it's always been in the back of my head, but it wasn't until I was sitting there in the hearings in July when I started to hear that in addition to some of the gender issues we've been working on, there were also these issues around racism, and I expect those to be solved, and I expect them to be solved by now, frankly.
Can we talk about the total compensation report? Moving forward.
I feel like we have so many things to talk about. This is going to be the world's longest scrum.
Sir, were you surprised that the city has never done a total compensation report? They've done, pension reviews, pay reviews, but never looked at everything.
Well, I wasn't surprised because that's why I commissioned it. Because I felt, along with other members of council, that it was important for us to take this broader view. Now, there is a lot of data in there it's going to take a lot of time to really go through and understand. But what I was surprised by about the results, if I answer your next question that you haven't asked yet, is how far back we are in many ways. In some ways, we're very competitive. In a couple of small areas, we might be a little too generous. But even when you include pensions, and people talk about how generous the public sector pensions are, I was surprised at how our total compensation falls short across the country. I knew it fell short in Calgary because wages in Calgary for every job are much higher than in other parts of the country. But I was surprised how much we fell short across the country. I was hoping we'd save a bunch of money with this review, but it sounds like we've actually been chipping away at this for a long time. Well, the first thing we got to do is digest it, right? And we got to understand our levers of control. So for a large proportion of the city's workplace, compensation is a negotiated item. So the city can't unilaterally change it. But certainly this gives us some information about, as we go into bargaining with our unions, our labor partners, where we are falling short or where we're overly generous, so that's helpful. But I think the overall philosophy, particularly for our non-union or management exempt staff, we really just have to absorb what we've learned and figure out areas in which we can change things. So for example, we're paying our lawyers, was in the report, very close to the top of the range, and we still lost 26 out of 60 lawyers in the last couple of years to other jobs because we're way, way out of sync. And let me tell you, the city is well served when you've got good, smart lawyers working for the city. So there are some specific areas where we really have to look. And I will say one thing we have already addressed, and even in our tough budget, we put some money aside to address, was areas where managers were making less than their staff because we frozen management salaries for so long that they've gone a bit out of sync. So we at least have addressed that piece.
I guess as you mentioned, you can see what you want to see in this report.
Oh my gosh, can you ever? There's a lot of numbers.
Yeah, like people will say, oh, you're overpaying here, you're overcompensating at this level or this job, and other people are behind. What would you say to the community at large? There's this perception of, City Hall, fat cats, jobs for life, great pensions, all that sort of thing. Cut those budgets, save money. What would you say?
The data really don't show that. They really show that for frontline staff, they're actually probably getting paid in total comp a little bit less than they would if they were in the private sector. That includes pension and job security and benefits. But ultimately, I think the city's done a really good job of trying to remain extremely fair on all of this. And there's, unfortunately, because I was kind of hoping there'd be big savings opportunities here, that the city actually, citizens can rest assured that the city's been managing this portion of the budget as well as we can.
So have some myths been slain?
I feel like some myths have been busted. There are people who will always believe this, regardless of the situation they find themselves in. Certainly as we're going into an election, you're going to hear a lot of misinformation about city compensation, but at least the facts are out there.
In full circle, then, we don't have a process right now in the city of Calgary for reviewing these things regularly. Is that something you think needs to be on the table, like to do this once every 5 years, every 10 years, 8 years, whatever?
Yeah, we probably need, I think it's been about 20 years since we've looked at our management exempt total compensation. We chip away at it in different ways, but it's probably a good idea, good organizational hygiene to do it on a more regular basis.
This morning we heard that the city had not been engaged as far as changing the coal policy by the province. And then, of course, Councillor Collier has a notice of motion. What do you think the city could be doing as far as protecting upwater reservoirs from mining?
One of the city's most important roles that we very rarely talk about because it's not sexy is we really are the stewards and the managers of the Bow River watershed, the South Saskatchewan River watershed. So while the lands in question that the province is talking about are not directly impacting the headwaters of the Bow River, I understand that they are impacting the headwaters of the Oldman and Red Deer rivers. There is an impact to the overall watershed, and as such, the city, of course, will have something to say because we have to be able to manage the water. We're a large city on a small river, two small rivers. And so this is the most important piece for me for this conversation, and I'm happy to have had it because, to be honest with you all, one of the complaints that people have is that this really slipped by quietly. And I feel like even for me personally, it kind of slipped by. I knew there was some conversation about changing a policy back in the spring. I didn't realize that this was relating to very active applications now. I had the opportunity last week to chat with a rancher and a country music singer who've been very active in this, who spent a lot of time filling me in on what's really happening. And I gotta say, it was pretty shocking to me, the lack of consultation and the lack of discussion on this. And I think that we as a city should have a conversation about our own point of view as a corporation, as a government.
Does the city have time to wait till June 2021 as implemented council resolution?
I'm going to probably ask for it to be a bit quicker than that, because I don't think we need all that much time to craft a briefing.
Okay.
Anyone else? I'm deeply concerned about it. As you know, I've spent many years advocating for access for Alberta energy to the world, and for this project in particular. I had the chance many years ago to sit down with the key decision maker in the Obama White House, as well as a number of US senators and Congress people on this question. And it is extremely disappointing. It's very problematic for Alberta because we believe that this makes sense within Canada's action plan. I know that the Prime Minister feels that way as well, and will continue to advocate for this. That said, it's not exactly like this was a surprise. You know, the president-elect was the vice president in the White House that canceled the project. He has signaled his desire to cancel the project for many, many months. And so my expectation would be that the provincial and the federal governments have been working very, very hard, not just on lobbying him to change his mind, but also on various contingencies and protecting the Alberta taxpayer from the downside risk of this project being canceled. That's my expectation, and I hope that we will learn more about that in the days to come.
Hold out much hope that there is the ability to change Mr. Biden's mind?
You know, probably not, but it's an interesting thing because if you recall, when the Obama White House canceled Keystone XL, we started a big conversation about a different pipeline project in Canada, the Energy East pipeline. And when President Trump uncanceled it, we dropped Energy East, or TransCanada dropped Energy East. It wasn't the government, it was TransCanada who dropped Energy East, or TC Energy as they're now called, to focus entirely on XL. I sure hope that work's been going on in the background to resurrect a different mode of market access, given that XL requires another country to agree, and it's not within our own control. So I certainly hope that work's been going on as well. All right, thanks everybody.